Hello, everyone, and welcome to another inspiring episode of Seekers of Christ on Gospel First. I'm your host, Joe Cirillo, and today we're joined by Dusty Smith, an attorney, former city councilor, and a former lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. He's gone from serving a mission to becoming an ex-Mormon who for 26 years fought against the church. Now, let's hear how the Lord rescued him and is now a defender of the faith. Now, if you like these stories, please hit the like, subscribe, and share button so that we can share the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ together. So let's get started. So welcome, Dusty. I'm really grateful you're here on our podcast. Glad that you're here. So I just wanted to maybe introduce yourself a little bit so that the people in Canada know who you are.
My name is Dusty Smith. I'm an attorney and former city councilman and a former lieutenant colonel. I have a beautiful wife and some kids and some dogs. In fact, you may hear my newest addition of a 9-week-old Great Pyrenees that we have. So far he's calm, but he may bark in a minute or something.
So Dusty, tell me, were you born in the church or were you a convert to the church?
No, in fact, my dad left when I was 5, and I was raised by my mother and my grandparents. And my mother was Lutheran, my grandfather was Catholic, and my grandmother was Baptist. So
wow, good mixture.
I went to all three. I jokingly say I didn't know whether I should stand, sit, kneel, sprinkle, dunk, or pour. But of course, there was never any doubt that they taught me to love God.
That's the main key. So how did you come in contact with the church?
Well, back when I was in college, I went to University of Texas in Austin, and my third year in college, a family friend ran through she coming home from school. She's about 13, thought the glass doors on her house were open. They were shut. She ran through the glass, fell and landed on a piece of glass that pierced her throat and killed her instantly. And I got incredibly angry with God. And so I just stopped going to church. I stopped praying. I stopped having anything to do with God. I graduated from University of Texas in 1982. And the next year, I went home to visit my mother. Although, as I say, I really went home because I wanted to wash my clothes for free. And I was there at lunchtime. My mother had been to Salt Lake on business at some point and had put a Book of Mormon that someone had given her into my old bedroom. And when I was washing clothes, I thought, well, I'll read an old Louis L'Amour Western, because I had a whole bookshelf of Louis L'Amour Westerns that I read when I was a teenager. And as I was thumbing through the books on my shelf, the Book of Mormon that somebody had given my mother fell off the bookshelf. And so I sat down and opened it up, wondering what the heck it was, and just opened it up to 3rd Nephi by happenstance, and I was intrigued.
Wow.
And so I went to the phone book, and when I'm in a crowd, I always go to the little kids and say, a phone book is a book about this big. It's got names and numbers in it, and if you're short, you sit on it at the dinner table. And I always also say that this is kind of where y'all are really strange, because if I want to look up Catholic parish, it's parish. If I want to look up the Baptist church, it's church. But y'all, it was ward or stake. And I had no idea what number to call, but it was lunchtime and I was hungry. So I called the stake.
Yeah.
And a fella answered the phone and he said, I'm never here during the week, but I forgot something on Sunday and I came by here at lunch, pick it up, and it was the stake president. And so we chatted, and I told him I was kind of intrigued by what I'd read. And so we arranged for me to meet with the missionaries at the University Ward in Austin, Texas. And I did. And eventually, very soon after that, in fact, I was baptized.
Coming from a Baptist background, a Lutheran, did you say Lutheran and the Catholic, Lutheran, and Baptist? What was so you had Christ in your life, but what made the switch?
I think what really attracted me back in 1983, when I first opened up and started studying, I liked the idea that Christ came to this side of the world, and it fit with questions that I had. It fit with questions that I had about, if you look in the New Testament, and he says, "Other sheep I have that are not of this fold." And
Right.
you kind of wonder if and I was a scholar, I like to, I'm an attorney. I ask questions a lot, and I would ask, well, who are the other sheep? Where did he go? Who are these people? I think that probably attracted me. And I'll also throw something else out there that I very seldom talk about too much, but I also liked the idea that Peter, James, and John came down and gave the Melchizedek priesthood to Joseph. And I'll tell you why. When I was 6, 7, 8 years old, I had this recurring dream. I mean, I had it all the time. And in my dream, there were 3 men that the way they were dressed, I always in my dream assumed they were Peter, James, and John. And they're walking, it looks like in the clouds, they're walking.
Mm-hmm.
And a hole opens up and a ladder comes down from where they are. And at one point, they turn and look back like they're listening to somebody. And then they turn back around and they all come down to go to earth. And that's where my dream ended. But I had that dream over and over and over again. And it never made any sense to me until I read about the fact that they came down and gave the Melchizedek priesthood to Joseph Smith.
Wow. Well, and how old were you then?
It was elementary school.
So the Lord was preparing you in some way, giving you these kind of visions a little bit of these dreams.
I think that you can look back and find lots of things that occurred that led me to where I ended up. The funny thing is that as soon as when I got baptized, I was 23 years old. I had a college degree and I had a job. And people would walk up to me after I got baptized and they'd say, "You know what, you should serve a mission." And I would say, "I am not going to serve a mission. I'm an adult now. I have a degree, I have a job." And somebody else would walk up a few weeks later, "You really ought to serve a mission." And I said, "I'm adulting, not going to serve a mission." Somebody else would walk up, "You really ought to serve a mission." And I would get frustrated. It's like, come on, I'm an adult. I'm not a 19-year-old kid. I'm 23. I'm not going to serve a mission.
I'm getting ready to get married. Come on.
So anyway, while I was at the MTC, I was 24 when I went on my mission. And I was in the MTC with a bunch of 19-year-olds. And when I became a member of the church, a lot of my friends and family turned their backs on me. When I quit a job where I was making money to go on a mission where I was not going to make any money, they thought I was insane. And all these kids running around the MTC at night, especially first time away from home for a lot of them, I was frustrated with that. And I finally said, if nobody cares if I'm here, I'm going to go home. So I went down to the payphone and I called church headquarters. And I said, if nobody cares if I'm here, I'm going home. And the poor receptionist said, "Can you hold for a second?" So I wait, I'm on hold, and all of a sudden this voice comes on and says, "Elder, if nobody else cares if you serve a mission, I do. My name is Elton Perry." He and I chatted, and he asked me, because he knew I had no real family support on my mission, he asked me that if I would be his pen pal on my mission. So on my mission, I wrote back and forth with Elder Perry. And then when I came off my mission, he asked me to come up to Salt Lake and meet him in his office, give him a mission report. So I did.
That's amazing. So tell me, you've had some great experiences on your mission. Where did you serve?
Honduras. Catholic.
So you must have had some pretty good, interesting stories there. But
I had a lot of, even when I hated the church, if you had asked me my best time of my life, I would have said my best 2 years were when I was a missionary.
Wow.
I loved being a missionary. And a ton of spiritual experiences, a ton of miracles that I saw in my mission. But I was 24 when I went on my mission, almost 26 when I came off my mission.
So Dusty, tell me, when you've had those kind of experiences and you had a great mission, what was that turning point that you pulled away from the church? And as I've heard from other podcasts, you were really knocking it down. You were really didn't want anything to do with it. And
I hated the church. So when I came off my mission, I went to law school. In my third year of law school, I went to Palmyra and to see the pageant. I went to law school in Michigan, and I drove to Palmyra through Canada to see the pageant. I encountered at the pageant anti-Mormons. I'd never seen those before. I'd only been a member of the church for 6 years, and a year and a half of that was as a missionary. So I just never encountered that before. Didn't know they existed. And I came back from that experience wanting to be better as an apologist for the church. So I began to read old doctrine books and old history books, and I began to read things that I'd never heard before, and didn't know if I believed it or not. And when I asked questions, back in '89, think about it. When you ask questions, you were told, don't have questions, just have faith. The church is much more open now.
yes,
But back in '89, they were very still kind of circling the wagons. And they said, they wouldn't, my questions went unanswered until I woke up one day and I no longer had a testimony. And when I wrote a letter to the stake president asking my name to be taken off the records, they responded by excommunicating me. And that made me very angry. And so that's why I started my rant and hate against the church.
The church is under attack by a lot of individuals who are nitpicking at certain things, right? Like, to be truthful, I have friends and I have family members who have removed themselves from the church. It's a hard thing to take, but I'm just trying to figure out, you've had great experiences and then boom, the crash happened.
Number one, I never read anything anti until I left the church. The things that caused me to leave the church were things that I read in the history books of the church, in the old doctrine books of the church. And I began to question, okay, I can walk the streets of Jerusalem, but I can't walk the streets of Zarahemla. I read some of the things, Brigham Young taught, and I thought, I don't believe those things. And when you ask about them, I was just told, don't ask. And when a person like me hears, just don't ask questions, just have faith,
Sure.
I figure, okay, you're hiding something. And if you're hiding something, you must be false. And if you're false, then I have been hoodwinked. I just spent a year and a half as a missionary for a false church. And then they excommunicate me because I have questions and I don't have a testimony anymore. They excommunicate me. I don't think so, Scooter.
Yeah.
And I got incredibly hateful. I mean, bad hateful. I was on a rampage for 26 years. In my defense, anybody who's gone to law school will understand this. But law school is not easy. My wife back then did not speak English. I was working a full-time job, going to law school full-time, raising a family. My wife didn't drive, so I had to do all the grocery shopping and all the doctor's visits, had 2 children born during exam week. And then I was studying in my last semester of law school. I had a full-time job, a part-time job, studying full-time for the bar. I literally
no sleep.
For 3.5 years, I lived on 3 hours of sleep.
Oh my!
And so I was not physically, emotionally, or spiritually prepared for that battle that I had. Very hard time in my life with all that I had going on. And there's a reason why most law schools don't let you work at all your first year. Mm-hmm. But I worked a full-time job and drove 2 hours a day, and raised the family, and had church callings, and literally didn't sleep for 3.5 years until I took finished the bar exam. And then I just had a full-time job, and that was like a vacation, just having a full-time job with no school.
But amongst you not having any sleep, I guess the anger was building up, wasn't it?
The anger built up when they excommunicated me.
But it didn't stop, because now you were really on heavy.
Man, I'll tell you, after they excommunicated me, I was bad. I mean, I did all I could to hurt the church. I was in the Army, and after law school, I went to the Army, and I came back from Panama to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and discovered the internet. And I found that I could go on the internet and argue with people from the comfort of my own home. I mean, and I joined Mormon boards. Like, one of them was called "What Do Mormons Really Believe?"
Yeah, I've heard of it.
And I went to go tell them. I mean, I was hateful. But I met a guy on one of those boards named Mike. Mike lives in Springville, Utah, here, not too far from me now. But Mike and I had these really terrible debates, but over time became friends. And he began to put my name in the temple every week, and he did that for 20 years. Every week for 20 years. And I would get mad at him for doing that. You know, false church, false God, false temple. Stop putting my name in that stupid temple of yours. But for 20 years, every single week.
Wow, the faith of brothers, huh? They had trust and faith in you. I can't imagine. I just listening to some of your podcasts. There was a part the miracles started happening, and I believe you got ill at one point.
In 2009, I was an attorney in Dallas, and I had to go down to the Mexican border for depositions. My client came in from Mexico, couldn't get a visa to come in, so we actually did the deposition at the INS station right there at the border in Laredo, Texas. And I came back from that with a souvenir, the swine flu. Now, we'll never know how many people died from the swine flu because they didn't test everyone like they did with COVID. But we do know for a fact that hundreds of thousands of people around the world died, probably much more than that. But like I said, they didn't test everybody. And there was no cure. And when I tried to go to the doctor wouldn't let me come to the doctor. The swine flu came from Mexico to the States. And when they realized that I had come from Mexico, they said, you probably have the swine flu, which they were pretty clear that it was clear that I did. And they said, you're not allowed to come see us. We don't want you to get anybody here sick, because there was no cure. So I was actually, I call it my deathbed in Dallas, Texas, and two missionaries knocked on my door, and my eldest boy, for whatever reason, let them into my house and brought them up to my deathbed. And I'll never understand why he did that. But this is true story. One of them looks at me and he goes, wow, you're sick. And I remember thinking to myself, man, the spirit is really strong in that one. And I asked him to get out of my house. And one of them says, well, can we give you a blessing? And I said, if it'll get you out of my house. And so they laid their hands, and I was running huge fever. I couldn't stand up to save my life. I was so sick. Any listener who's had the swine flu knows exactly what I'm talking about. They laid their hands on my head, gave me a blessing, and I was immediately healed. I don't mean I got better over the next couple of days. I mean that in that moment, the sweating stopped, the fever broke, and I was able to stand up from bed for the first time in days. And I walked him downstairs to the front door and said, they'll never come back.
Even after that?
Even after that.
Wow. So I guess the Lord didn't touch you quite enough yet. Hey, you weren't sure.
Apparently the Lord needed a bigger tube before. But my hatred ran so deep that I acknowledged I got well, but I said, well, I'm Catholic and Catholics get well too. So it was the Catholic, was God still loved me, even though I'm not LDS. The blessing didn't do it. It was my belief in God that did it. And I completely discounted the missionaries.
But you've also had some other miracles. You told the story about when you sold your house.
Well, let me back up, because there's a series of things that happened. Okay. First, in 2014, I joined another board called, I forget what it was called, but I went to argue with them. And this girl Country Boy was my screen name. And this girl messages me and she says, I mean, it was very clearly I was anti-LDS, very clear. But she messages me and she said, I know you're you don't believe like I believe, but I feel strangely drawn to you. Do you mind if we converse? And I wrote her back and I said, sure, but I have to advise you, I'm married. And she wrote back and she said, I'm 75, get over yourself. But we began to chat, and one day we were on the phone because she didn't want to type, and I still only knew her as Garden Girl. And she asked me, do I have any family members in the church? And I said, I don't. I said, well, you know what? I might. Back when I was a member in the 80s, I heard of a guy who's a mucky muck in the church named Dean Jesse. Now, if you never heard of Dean Jesse, go look at the Joseph Smith papers and look and see who's in the cover, who's responsible. That's one of his, that's his baby. He's the church historian emeritus. And there was a long pause and she said, Dean Jesse's your cousin? And I said, yep. And she said, Dean Jesse's my cousin. So this girl who was strangely drawn to me is a cousin I never knew existed. So anyway, about the same time, my wife got a promotion in her job, but she would have to move to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And as I jokingly say, I don't know about anybody else, but the words promotion and Baton Rouge, Louisiana never belong in the same sentence. But she was going to be responsible for all the studios from Texas to Florida, and we would have to live apart. But we had a plan that we would meet once a month in Shreveport and do that. That's about halfway between us. And we would do that until the same position opened up in the Dallas area and she could move back to Texas. And I'd stay in Dallas with our house and my job. I had a good job making good money. And so she did. And she took the company that her district was in the 40s. She took it up to the top 4. And her reward for that in January of 2015 was that they told her they were going to close her district and give her severance paperwork. But the next day, the vice president of the company called and said, don't sign any severance paperwork. There's a position open in Baltimore. These positions take 2 weeks of vetting. So stay where you are and we'll hope you get this job in Baltimore. We'll move you from Baton Rouge to Baltimore. And so that was the plan. And we decided I wouldn't visit her once a month in Baltimore, but she would do that until the position opened up in Dallas. So I called my friend Mike in Springville. And I said, Mike, do me a favor and pray that Susan gets this position in Baltimore. We like her to stay with the company until she's vested. And Mike says, I'll do it. I'll pray for her. But see, here's where my what I should have done is hung up the phone. Said, thank you, Mike, and hung up the phone. Nope. What I said was, however, Mike, if God really wants me to come back to the church, he will send Susan to Utah. Now, I felt really comfortable saying that because there were no openings in Utah that day. The very next day, the person in Utah retired. And the very next day, Susan's paperwork was transferred from Baltimore to Salt Lake, and she was hired without the 2-week vetting.
The Lord's trying to get your attention there for sure.
Now, I called Mike, and I said, you're not going to believe this, Mike, but Susan's going to Salt Lake. And he said, well, you know what you told God? And I said, man, I was just kidding. And he said, God wasn't. So that's when I hit my knees, and I said, okay, Heavenly Father, for 26 years, I've had issues. And nobody's been able to answer my issues, answer my questions. And I've talked to your apologist. I've heard the apologetics. None of it worked for me. And so for the next few weeks, I would wake up in the middle of the night with another answer to a question that I had, until I woke up one day in March of 2015 and I had my testimony back. And my first phone call was to Mike, and I bore my testimony, and Mike wept.
It's almost like a being a born again type of experience, isn't it?
You know, in some ways, yes.
Yeah.
But to me, when I got my testimony back, I had this, I hate to say the word vision, but it was something where the Lord walks up to me holding his hands like this, and he says, I've been keeping this for you safe and warm for 26 years. I'm going to give it back to you now. This time you take care of it. A couple of weeks after that, I flew down up to Salt Lake, to visit Susan, who had rented an apartment here. And every day I walk 5 miles. I can't run anymore because I've had 6 knee surgeries from an incident in the Army. So I walk 5 miles. And I was on my walk, and the Lord said, "This is home now." And I said, "No, it's not. I have a job in the house in Texas." And the Lord said, "This is home now." And I said, "Lord, I have a job and I have a house. You may have seen it." And the Lord says, "This is home now." And I said, "Susan doesn't want to move here. We have a plan. She's coming back to Texas eventually." Well, I get back to the apartment and I say, "Suze, out of curiosity, what do you think about Utah?" And she said, "I've been wondering how to bring it to your attention. I don't ever want to leave."
Oh my, you're stuck.
So that's when I go back to Texas and I say, "Okay, I'll try to sell the house." So I call a realtor, and the realtor comes. Now, look, my house, I loved it. 2-story balcony, front porch, but it's built in 1929, and it had a ton of issues. And the realtor said, "You can't sell this house." I said, "Why?" I said, "Because you can't get it up to code. It's got issues that you can't get it to code to sell it." And she said, "You could try to repair it, but it'll cost you so much money to get this thing fixed that you're never going to be able to make any money on it." I said, "Okay, maybe I can rent it." Well, I got rebaptized. The next week, a guy knocks on my door. He says, "I want to buy your house." I said,
Right out of the blue.
Out of the blue. I said, "My house isn't for sale." He said, "I don't care. I want to buy it." And I said, "Sir, you have no idea how much that means to me, and you can't fathom what it means to me, but I got to tell you, I can't afford to fix it up to sell it to you." He said, "Nope, I want to buy it as is." I said, "How much?" And it was more than the house was worth. Now, the rest of that story is about a year later, I'm in the apartment here in Salt Lake that Susan had rented. I get a phone call, and a guy says, "I want to buy your house in Texas." I said, "I've already sold that house." He said, "You sure?" I said, "Pretty sure, I was there." He said, "Did you get the money?" I said, "And spent it." And he said, "Hang on." And I could hear him shuffling papers, and he comes back and says, "The person who sold your house disappeared. That house is abandoned and in foreclosure."
It's almost like a story of the 3 Nephites who are coming to your rescue.
You're not the first person who's indicated that.
Wow.
And I'm not going to say it was the 3 Nephites or any one of them, but I will say it's pretty odd. That house sat abandoned for about 4 years. Somebody else came along and bought it and tore it down, because by then I drove by one day when I was visiting Texas, and the windows were broken out, and it was just a disaster. And somebody bought it, and it's really a pretty house now. But for 4 or 5 years, it sat abandoned.
It's almost like driving by and you can see your life that was shattered, right? It's like symbolically that your life was shattered. It's done. It's over with. Now we're going to build you a new house.
There's a lot to be said for that as well. Now, a few weeks after that, Susan took me to Moab to see the arches, because until then, the only arches I knew was McDonald's. And I'm literally in the hotel room waiting for her to get ready on Saturday morning, and I get a phone call, and the girl says, "Is this Dusty?" I say, "Yes." She says, "I see you've just been on the church website and you want information on the church." I said, "No, wasn't me." She said, "Sir, the only way I get your name and number is if you're on the church website and you ask for information on the church." I said, "Be that as it may." Wasn't me. She said, "Well then, sir, how do you propose to tell me I got your name and number?" I said, "I don't know, but my computer is in Salt Lake and I am in Moab." And she said, "You remember the church?" And I said, "Let me tell you a story." I get done with my story, and she's in tears. And she said that she was at the MTC having a crisis of faith and going to go home. And they put her on these calls, calling people who want information on the church. And she got my name and number and called me. And she said, "Thank you for your story. I'm going to go finish my mission."
Oh, bless your heart. Wow. That's amazing.
A few weeks after that, another phone call. Woman says, "Is this Dusty Smith?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And she says, "Would you please hold for President Uchtdorf?" And I went, "Yes, ma'am."
So you were the one that President Uchtdorf was talking about in conference.
Yeah, October 16 priesthood session. He talked, and
Yeah.
there's a talk about, he gave about Alman Amulek,
Yeah.
and he tells. So I go visit him, and he says, "I'm going to use your story in conference, but I'm not going to give your real name." And he did. He told my story in general conference and used a different name for me and a different name for Mike. And a few weeks after that, Susan and I went on a date. Well, we went to a gun show. And I tell people in Utah,
a true Texan.
yeah, I don't know how y'all date in Utah, but in Texas, we go to gun shows. Well, I needed a holster because everything I owned was in storage because I went from a house in Texas to an apartment in Salt Lake. And I saw a table that was selling holsters, and I walked over, and I'm talking to this fella at the table, and he says, "You're from Texas?" And I said, "Yep." And he goes, "Why are you in Utah?" I said, "Let me tell you a story." And he says, "Wait a second, that talk that Elder Uchtdorf gave in October was about you?" And I said, "Yes." He goes, "Well, can we chat for a second?" I said, "Sure." So we go over to a quiet little area in the expo center there, this guy and my wife and me, and another fellow follows us over. And when I get done telling my story, the fellow that followed us over said, "You're from Texas?" And I said, "Yep." He goes, "Oak Cliff?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "You don't remember me, but 8 years ago, I gave you a blessing when you had the swine flu."
Wow.
Now, the rest of that story is he goes inactive after his mission. Before the 2016 priesthood session, his bishop says, "I've had enough of your activity. Go to priesthood." He goes to priesthood, and he hears the talk on Alman Amulek, and it reactivates him, not realizing, because my real name wasn't given, not realizing that the talk that reactivated him was about somebody he had given a blessing to 8 years earlier in Texas.
Wow. Wow. That is amazing. That is amazing. So the Lord's been using you all along the way to help these other individuals. So you've been an instrument in his hands without you realizing it.
Yeah. The Lord knew what was going to happen. Since I was talked about in General Conference, there's been a magazine article in LDS Living. There's a book about me. I've done 120 firesides, both live in 8 states now, and 2 countries. But via Zoom during 2020, I did in Europe and South Africa and Mexico and other states. Wow. I've done 120 total firesides, podcasts, you name it. I've about done it, and the Lord knew what He was doing. There's one video on a Facebook page called High Five Live.
Yeah.
And they contacted me, and they said, this was several years ago, 17 or 18. They contacted me and said, "Would you please do a video?" I said, "Nope, no thank you." And they said, "Please." And I said, "No, not interested." They said, "Look, we get 6,000 to 10,000 views. You might help somebody. You might get 10,000, up to 10,000 views. You may help somebody." I said, "Fine, I'll do your video." So I did the video. To date, that video has had over 1.1 million views.
It's amazing, Dusty. It really is amazing. I really believe that the Lord, we know that the Lord knows what He's doing, but He knows us individually of what we can do and what we're able to do, but we don't know it yet.
He loves each and every one of us as if we were the only person on this world.
Yeah.
And look, I get every day almost, I get people that message me, email me, have heard the story, want to talk to me. A lot of times, or they'll send me emails or messages. Most of them are just thank you. Mm-hmm. I love your story or whatever. I've had more than a few that have come back to the church and have told me, "Thank you for your story." In fact, before the general conference, the last general conference, I got an email. There was somebody that had heard my story, and we had 2 or 3 years ago, and we had gone back and forth with emails. And I said, you got to get out of your own way. You're hurting your own self here. You got to get, and he stopped talking to me. And I thought, well, okay, hopefully someday he'll come back. before General Conference, this last one we had, I got an email and he said, "You haven't heard from me in a couple of years. On Saturday before conference, I'm getting rebaptized." He said, "Thank you for your story."
You know, what's really been on my mind lately, and why I'm doing this podcast, is that I have this acute concern, if you will, for the youth. There's so much coming against them. They read so much negativity. They read anti-literature, you know, the CES letters and all this other stuff. And they leave the church without really studying and getting to know the Savior. What would you say to them?
Go back to the basics. You know, what I tell people is, you're going to find a lot of negative about the church. But trust me, give me 5 minutes with anything, any topic, any company, and I can trash it for you. You know, that doesn't mean it's a bad company. And in fact, there was two quick stories. One was a guy who walked up to me one day and he said, "Can you give me a hand? Help me out." And I said, "I'll do what I can." He says, "Can you help me find the perfect church?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You can?" I said, "Yeah, easy." He said, "How do I find the perfect church?" And I said, "Die."
There you go.
You're not going to find the perfect church on this earth. We're not supposed to find the perfect church. We're supposed to find the true church. But we're going to have warts. We're run by imperfect people. I had a young couple walk up to me after a fireside one time. And she dragged her husband up. And she said, "We just got married, but he's found some things about the church he didn't know before, and he wants to leave the church. Can you help us?" I said, "No, I can't, but I do have a question." They said, "What?" I said, "You just got married?" They said, "Yep." I said, "Y'all just moved in together?" "Yep." And I turned to him and I said, "Now you found out things about her you didn't know. She doesn't put the toothpaste cap back on. She squeezes the toothpaste tube from the middle. She puts the toilet paper in backwards. She doesn't cook like your mother. She's a bit of a slob." Now, I don't know which one of those was true, but she was doing this. So I said, "You just found those things out about her. Are you going to leave her because you just found out things you didn't know? Or is the love good enough that you're going to stay with her despite the things you just discovered about her?" He said, "The love is good enough. I'm going to stay despite the things I found out about her." And I said, "Well, you just described the church."
What a beautiful response.
They walked away and he turned to her and says, "We need to go home and pray." But that's kind of how I feel. You're not going to find the perfect church. We're going to make mistakes. We're people. Okay. And we have warts, but too many people will judge the church based on things that happened in the 1800s or the early 1900s. And I will tell people all the time, it is unfair to use your 2024 moral goggles and judge the conduct of people in the 1800s. Not
Sure.
fair. And you shouldn't do it. And if that's how you're going to make you're going to make your arguments based on things that happened or were said in the 1800s without the full context of those things, you're not being fair to you, and you're not being fair to the people that were in the 1800s who don't know about us now. You know, they don't know the changes that are going to happen in the world. So I tell people, go back to the basics. Did he have the first vision? Yes. Did he interpret the Book of Mormon? Yes. After that, what else matters? If those two things are true, he's a prophet. Now, the job description for prophet doesn't say perfect. I've looked at it. Abraham lied. Peter denied. Moses killed. And we could spend a whole day talking about Jonah.
Sure.
You know, you're not going to find that we have perfect prophets. People make mistakes. People misinterpret. People don't understand. We're all human. But I'm an attorney, a published author, published poet, songwriter, written briefs that will make your eyes water. With all my education and experience, I could not write the Book of Mormon. I challenge you to read the rich doctrine in 2nd Nephi and say that came from the mind of a boy. No way. So if you take those two things, if you take the first vision and the Book of Mormon, nothing else really matters. So go back to the basics. Get in touch with your testimony of those things. You're going to find negative stuff, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means that we've done some things we shouldn't have done. Joseph did some things he shouldn't have done. Brigham said some things he shouldn't have said. Doesn't mean he wasn't a prophet.
We've just been taught by President Nelson that the church is a hospital for the spiritually ill. We go there to learn, to grow, to experience. But the thing is that, the restoration is ongoing. We are getting more information today than they did earlier because we're at that time of life, I guess, that time period. The message has to come to us in the way that we can understand, not the way they understood it back then, but it's how we understand it now.
We're in the gathering process. That it's ongoing. It doesn't mean it's the gathered process. It's the gathering process. Gathering is present and future.
Yeah.
It's not been accomplished yet. The work is not done. And if the work isn't done, it's either ongoing or it's stopped. And we know it hadn't stopped. So ergo, it's ongoing.
Dusty, I love the church. I love the gospel. And what I love about it is because, I've studied many other organizations throughout my life. One thing I found out about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the love of God and the love of the Savior is that one thing I learned from a church history tour that we just came back with. As a matter of fact, Hank Smith from the Follow Him podcast was our director. And he quoted what the Lord told Joseph Smith, that they have made ample provisions for us to return back to them. And so when I think about all these beautiful people who are of different faiths, I can't comprehend when they say either you accept Jesus Christ now or you're going to hell. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the only church that talks about hope and talks about getting back to the presence of Father and the Son, and that He's made provisions for us to get back to Him.
We have eternal marriage.
Yeah.
Every other church in the world, every other law in the world, or in this country anyway, that does marriages, the day you're getting your marriage, you're getting a divorce decree. Until death do you part. In other words, you're going to stay married, but you're going to be divorced on this day. The day you die, you're divorced.
Yeah.
Why did God give me the gift He gave me of my wife, the amazing gift that He gave me of my wife, and say you can only have her when you're on earth, when the best of what we're going to live is after earth? You can have her for the barely bad part of your life, but the good part of your life, you're not going to get her anymore. When I became a member again, Susan was Southern Baptist, and she said, "I'll go to church with you. I'll support you, go to functions, but I will never, ever, 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 ever get baptized." And I never pressured her. All I ever said was I would look at my patriarchal blessing and I would say, "Hey, baby, my patriarchal blessing says I get sealed in the church, in the temple. I'd like it to be with you." When we met with Elder Uchtdorf, he talked to her. And the next day she said, "I'm ready for the discussions." And I was able to baptize my own wife, and we were sealed a year later in the Salt Lake Temple. Wow. But I want to tell you about the miracle of my cancer. Cancer has absolutely increased my testimony. On the first week of January of 22 is when the doctor called me and said, "You've got throat cancer, stage 3. It spread to lymph nodes in your neck." My world, I really thought in that week, first week of January, there's no need to do New Year's resolutions. I walked back to my wife, and she looked up and she knew. She could tell by the look of I couldn't talk. I lost for words. And she was on the bed reading a magazine, and she stood up and she could tell. She knew what the news was without me saying a word. And she gave me a big hug and she said, "You've never lost a thing in your entire life. You are not starting now." But not once did I pray for healing. Not once. What I said was, "Heavenly Father, I know you have the power to heal me, but your will be done." And before my surgery, I had another blessing. When they did my surgery, before my surgery, see, they cut my neck open. Mm-hmm. They took out 20 lymph nodes, and they went down my throat and took out part of my tongue and my soft palate and my tonsil to get the tumor. They told me, "We're going to take out lymph nodes. We're going to cut your neck open and take out 20 lymph nodes. Your nerves surround your lymph nodes. It's going to be inevitable. We're going to cut nerves. When you get out of surgery, you won't be able to raise your left arm over your shoulder. You won't be able to probably talk very well. You won't be able to smile. You're gonna have to have therapy to relearn a lot. You may not be able to speak. You may have speech issues because we're going to be cutting these nerves. So I go to 4-hour surgery, and I get out of surgery. I'm in the ICU for the first night. First thing I do when I wake up in my bed is I try to raise my left arm, and I could raise it. And it was dark and I couldn't see, but I smiled and felt to see if my mouth was going up, and I was. What I didn't know was this. Doctor comes out after my surgery to see my wife, says, successful surgery. But something happened that I've never seen before. Susan said, what? Said, we would take out a lymph node and the nerves would fall off of it. We'd cut that lymph node, go to the next one. The nerves just fell off of it. Go to the next one. She said it happened 20 times. We never had to cut a single nerve.
What a miracle.
So I was able to come out of my surgery still able to preach the word of God. No speech was affected. Even though they took out part of my tongue, no speech was affected.
Dusty, you're a walking miracle. The Lord needs you. You know, you made a comment in one of the podcasts, which I really found just very comforting. There are no coincidences in life because God is a God of miracle.
Coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous. There are no coincidences. People will say, people tell me all the time, man, you have miracles that happen to you all the time. I just want one miracle. I say, you get them all the time too. Difference is I recognize them.
Brother Smith, thank you so much. I tell you, you've been very inspiring. I'm so grateful that you've been on our podcast. I know that touching lives is what we're here for. You know, I used to be a temple worker, and in the temple, I love the initiatories. And I often say to people, how do we become joint heirs with Christ? Right? And the blessings that are pronounced in the initiatories blesses us to become joint heirs with Christ so that we can lift others and help save others and help them to come to know Christ better. You know, that's what the work is all about, is coming to know Christ better. And through your experiences and through your story, you are touching lives.
I will tell you that I feel like I have a lot to make up for what I did for 26 years. Make sure that if anybody who listens to this wants to get in contact with me, that you give them my information.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I am always willing to talk to people. I'm always willing to talk to their families or whatever. I try my best to help whoever needs my help or wants my help. But the Lord is, I in each fireside by saying this, the Lord loves us. And no matter what we do, the Lord's going to love us. And I tell a little story about a play I was in when I was in high school called The Company of Wayward Saints, about a group of improvisationists that go around and do improvisations for whatever the audience gave them to act out. And in one scene, I play a doctor, an old-time doctor that does house calls. And I'm on the front porch of a house with a prospective father to deliver a baby. And the husband says, shouldn't you be doing something? And in the play, my response is, when God's ready, he'll let us know. And he questions, he says, you believe in God? And here was my answer in the play. That's a difficult question for a man of science to answer in these enlightened times. But I will tell you this, I know God believes in me. And what I tell people in my firesides is, no matter what you do or say or think, there is nothing you can do to get out of his Heavenly Father's reach. And no matter what you do, he will always believe in you.
Dusty, what a note to end on. I tell you, we could talk for hours. Thank you so much. And for those that are listening, I hope that you'll take away some of the story that Dusty has made available to us, because I tell you, life is a journey. But if we're with Christ, it's well worth it. It's well worth it. Dusty, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really much appreciate it. Well, until next time, God bless.